Do you know, like, I read that this morning in The Guardian and I rolled my eyes when they said nobody wants the job because the party's going to get belted in the May elections. And I was like,
I know.
What a luxury of the UK political cycle that you can afford to wait 4 months before you decide to neck your leader. Like, are you for real? You're not serious people. Like, there is so much at stake. But to all the point you've been saying, John, like, if you've got an idea and you've got an agenda and you think you know how to fix it and you're West Streeting, get in there, get in the game. Don't wait 4 months. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Okay, we are taping this one on a fresh, crisp Friday morning on the lands of W.B. Yeats, James Joyce, Jonathan Swift, and Oscar Wilde, just to name a few, and the lands of my fathers, and I think the lands of our guest's fathers as well. He is the former Director for Communications for Prime Minister Tony Blair and Prime Minister Julia Gillard. He's been on the show plenty of times to talk about UK and European politics, and it's great to have him back on the show again. John Mcternan, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
It's great to be back. And yes, I am an Irish citizen and therefore a UK citizen because of my granddad, who was an anti-treaty IRA man from Cork City, County Cork.
Very good. Just get it up front. I didn't think we'd talk about the IRA so soon, but there we go.
No, it's interesting. I think it's interesting looking at you look at the politics of any country that had a civil war. 100 years on, certain things can be talked about, like who did what, because at the moment it's moved on, but also the politics opens and fractures in a new way. And you sort of see that in the emerging landscape of Irish politics. And you sort of see it, in a way, one of my reflections on looking back on things is you see things moving 100 years on. I'm reviewing a book about Ramsay MacDonald, the first Labour Prime Minister. I'm reviewing that for the Financial Times. And what is so fascinating is where the Labour Party, in its formation in 1900, what did it come from? The 1880s and 1890s, a time of new institutions, new organisations, new unions, but also geopolitical conflict that ended up in the First World War, in economic change, political change, in the franchise growing and growing, the struggle for the women's vote and working class vote. So I kind of feel one of the things about where we are at the moment everywhere in the global north is something big is happening and the politics and governance isn't reaching to meet that moment. And that frustration is an energy that is tapped into more successfully by the populists of the right than Social Democrats are doing. So it kind of is, there's something interesting about looking back into the seeds of time, looking back into the moments that formed where we are. And that's it's interesting dealing with your personal life and your family history, but also in our movement's history. So there's some big things are going on.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually, because now I'm just thinking about yesterday we had lunch in Leinster House in Dublin. For those outside of not familiar with Irish politics, it's the Parliament, the Oireachtas of Irish government here in Dublin. And we had lunch with a member of Fianna Fáil who just self-described herself as a centre lefty.
Yeah.
And we had and the person sitting beside me was a former minister and a member for Fine Gael who I think was probably more left-wing than I was.
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of have to ask yourself, why did you not find the Labor Party? You know?
Yeah.
And particularly right now, Labor here in Ireland is struggling.
Yeah.
We walked past all of the portraits of former Taoiseachs, the treasurers, and there's Dick Spring, who's regarded as an absolute hero for Irish Labor, led them to, I think it was 33 seats in the Dáil. And they sort of look back on those days of Dick Spring and wonder when are they ever going to return. But yet here we have two people who are in other opposing parties that actually probably would fit quite nicely in Labor.
I know. And it's that, in a sense, it goes to a thing which I think, what's the answer to populism? Obviously deal with the economics. What's another answer, another part of the answer? There's something about the battle of ideas. And we have to be open and broad in a sense. What are the progressive ideas? What are the progressive ideals? What's the progressive purpose? Find partners for that, but build institutions which draw those individuals, their talent, and the institutions they've been helping to build, whether it's a credit union movement, as John Hume did, or whether it is tenants organizations, or whether it is, modern unionism, modern white-collar unionism, with people having to face up to the reality of AI. AI could do to white-collar workers what automation did to blue-collar workers. So there seems to me you have to have the ideas as well as the organization. I think it was Harold Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister, who won 4 elections out of the 5 he stood in. So really successful. He did a report on the Labour Party in the 1950s, whose headline was "The Victory of Ideals Must Be Organised." And it's like, we need victories, we need to win, we need ideals, and we need organisation. And it's like, what is materially changing in the world outside us that we need to relate to? And you're absolutely right. We have to ask the question, Labour in the UK has to ask the question, why is so much energy among progressives going anywhere but the Labour Party? Mm-hmm. What's happened to a government that won a landslide 18 months ago, whose support amongst voters, support in opinion polls, has halved, and not just that, hundreds of thousands of members have left the Labour Party, and the Labour Party is now a much weaker organisation, institutionally, on the ground, and politics is one in the air and on the ground. It's not simply one by having one charismatic leader or one big idea. It's one at every level.
Well, I mean, that's a great segue, because that's what we're going to talk about today is UK politics, but in particular the Labour Party. And when we last spoke, which I think was sort of late August, early September last year, we discussed the conversation was about the Labor the project. Does Labor have a project? And you argued that they clearly do, but it was whether it can be politically consolidated and it able to explain itself and pick its fights and emotionally connect with the policies with the voters' lived experience. That was September last year. So much has happened in that time. Yeah. In fact, it's got far more. I don't want to use the word depressing to read, but I mean, I certainly, when you started to read about leadership speculation, I was like, oh my God. Just give us a bit of an update from when we last spoke to where we are now with where the government's tracking.
So when we last spoke, the Labour Party were on about 25% in the polls, and that was a big drop from the 34% that Labour won the election on. So it's significant enough to go, something worrying is happening. The Labour Party is now on 17% in the polls, which is it's lost a further 8-9%. Now, that is a halving of the vote since the election in 2024. If you lose half your vote, something big is going on. And one of the events that's happened since we last talked to now is the budget. There was a big budget, and the budget, I think, brings together everything that's going wrong in the government. The core of the problem for this government has always been it's doing good things, but it can't tell a good story about them. So it lacks the storytelling ability, and we touched on that before. Great stories have a great quest. Where are we going? They have big enemies. There's a dragon to slay. Who are you fighting with? And we have a situation where actually we've legislated as a government for renters' rights, inside the rights for renters. And there are about 5-6 million renters. And there's about 1 million landlords, maybe fewer landlords. But it's like there's at least 5 times as many tenants as there are landlords. we've given a lot of power to tenants, lots of rights to them, and effectively brought in forms of rent control, quality control, all things which are a great political area. On our left, our populist left, there's a Green Party who are insurgent at the moment. They've taken some of that support from Labour. And they brought out a policy at their conference saying, attacking landlords. The Labour rebuttal of that is not to say we've got policies in place, we're in government, we're doing it, we're making it right for making it right for tenants. It was to say the Green Party want to abolish landlords. That was our attack on the Green Party. And I don't know if there are any people in the UK or in Australia who, when they hear the word landlord, could, you know what? Hands off my landlord. I love my landlord. And it's like, which side are you on? Well, apparently we're on the side of the landlord, not the rent, even though our legislation. So that inability to tell a story. Secondly, this was a big budget because the government is tied to fiscal rules, which are necessary to manage the budget around the revenue coming in and the spending going out, taxation levels, so that we can borrow safely on the markets. If you can't borrow, you can't invest. If you can't invest, you can't build new schools, new hospitals, you can't invest in railways. All the physical infrastructure run down over 14 years by the Tories. There's a purpose. And it's like Gordon Brown, always as Chancellor, would say, prudence with a purpose. We do these things for this purpose. We've turned into a party that has rules and obeys the bond markets as its purpose. You never have to obey a market, you have to manage a market. So something slipped up there. And the government, the core of the budget, which has not got across at all, was there was pressure on the government because of rising costs, potential challenges to tax revenue. And so should you cut spending or should you increase taxation in some way? The government chose to increase taxation so it didn't cut spending. Again, a very progressive position. I will do anything to maintain fiscal stability, except cut public services, except cut investment. It's a long-term thinking. And in the heart of it, there was an attack on child poverty by changing some of the benefits rules, which will probably lift 500,000 children out of poverty. But because the government spent 6 weeks preparing for the budget, briefing the newspapers, lots of drops, stories, going in one direction, which they then abandoned about a week before the budget. So they told a story, and it's that there's something at the heart, and I think we touched on it, but probably I think more about it nowadays than I did when we last spoke. This is a government of tactical responses, always tactical responses, never strategic ones. And a tactical response can always get you through the problem of the week, but it doesn't deal with the challenge of the year. And I think that's why we appear to have lost our way. And I think this budget crystallized a view of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, the Exchequer, the Treasurer. In effect, it crystallized a view of them in the eyes of the voters. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we enter the new year with the most unpopular Prime Minister in polling history. There's never been a more unpopular Prime Minister. And I think the most unpopular Chancellor of the Exchequer in polling history. So it's the actions of the government, and we'll finish on this. The government has always been its own worst enemy. I don't think there's a single moment politically in the last 18 months when the opposition parties, either Nigel Farage's Reform Party or Kemi Badenoch's Conservatives, they've not laid a hand on the government. The government has been getting in its own way.
You talked about the budget and changing their position a week before. That's where my next question I want to go to is this backflipping. In fact, there was a column this morning in the Guardian. I don't know if you got a chance to read it. Speaking about this, the government keeps on having these U-turns on major policy announcements. We've seen 2 in the past week. Sky News have a tally that there's been at least 13 major ones since they were elected in the May of 2024. When I think back to the premiership of Daniel Andrews, I think he flipped on 2 major announcements twice in the 11 years of his premiership. In fact, he built his premiership on being the guy that doesn't backflip but actually doubles down. He got elected on saying, I'm going to tear up a very, very expensive road project that, the Liberals had said was quite popular. And even when he got in, I think the department said, "Oh, you're not going to tear it up." He said, "Of course I'm going to tear it up," because he says what he does, and he does what he says. Keir Starmer, he's not Mr. Courage under fire, is he? Like, they've had so many backflips. What do you put this down to? Is it poor consultation with stakeholders? So there's this disconnect between the development of the policy and then how it's going to impact those that are going to benefit from it? Is it a lack of self-assurance? Does it just not know what it stands for? What's the driving force behind this inconsistency?
So I think it's a bit of all of those things. But the major thing is, I think this government came into government with his only real experience was a defeat in politics, defeated internally by Corbyn, defeated by the country on Brexit, defeated by Johnson, by Theresa May, by Cameron. So the adult experience of most of the cabinet members is just Labour losing, which makes you cautious. And I think they've become overcautious. I think that's an element of it. And I think that's led to a management style, which is, we've inherited government from a clown show. If we're not a clown show, we should get the benefit of not being a clown show, which I think is a fair enough assumption. But you don't get thanked for not being a clown show, because governments aren't meant to be a clown show. Mm. Just because you're not the Johnson government or the Truss government or the Sunak government, doesn't mean you get a gold star. You have to be a government for a purpose. And I think this has been a government which has ended up focusing on process, not purpose. And if you focus on process, you get tied up in knots with bureaucracy. You don't have that one line, which is like Margaret Thatcher's government always asked, is there a more private sector, market-oriented way of solving this problem? Because they were Tories. They had that question. Tony Blair always asked, his thing was, what matters is what works. So pragmatic, we're going to be pragmatic, centrist, reforming, but we're going to do these big things on poverty, on governance, internationally. And this is a government which doesn't seem to have a central question it's asking, apart from, does it help us please the bond markets? Does it help us balance the budget and meet our fiscal rules? The fiscal rules are a process, but where's the purpose? And if you know what your purpose is, then if you do U-turn, if you backflip, people understand. It's like, if you go through that list of things, it's like, what's one of the things that was done? There's been consultation on how closing a tax loophole impacts on farmers, and a better deal's been done. But because it's taken so long, and because there was an inflexibility built in, because it was a tax proposal, the government needed the tax money to meet its fiscal rules. So the fiscal rules came first, not closing a tax loophole. It took 18 months for the Labour Party to decide to tackle child poverty. That was its choice. It's a U-turn now, but if you're a government that U-turns to say our policy is tackling child poverty and you're a Labour government, people go, thank goodness you're being Labour again. And there's a bit of, if you're clear about your purpose, I think the country and voters are quite forgiving about you going, well, we actually consulted and we think we could do it differently, or we actually consulted and we don't think you should do it this way. But there is at the heart of this a much more technical sense of the way you manage as opposed to you lead. Mm. And these U-turns are being explained by Number 10, by the Prime Minister's office, by the leadership of the Labour Party. It's like, as Linton Crosby used to say, you've got to get the barnacles off the boat. The problem is, the biggest barnacle is the unpopularity of the government. The unpopularity that has halved Labour's support. So if you are cleaning a house, cleaning the stables, getting the barnacles off the boat, you presumably are doing this so that what you want to say and do is heard clearly. That's great. What is it you want to say and do that's going to meet the housing crisis, that's going to change the state of local high streets, that is going to deal with the threat that people fear of AI taking their jobs? what are you going to do about growing the economy? And it's like, you get to that and you've done all this process stuff, and it's like, well, we've done all the U-turns. Now what are we going to do? And it's not clear there's anything to fill that. We'll do a bit more of what we've been doing. But what we've been doing is made us unpopular.
The government just seems so unsure of itself.
Yes.
Like these U-turns, to me, demonstrate a fact that they thought they either thought that the policy was a good idea, and that they think that they've done all the work, and they should, the cabinet should be looking at each other and saying, right, are we happy with this? Yes, okay, we're happy with this. There's enough experience in this room to suggest that this is good policy. Okay, now let's go give it to our comms team and all the other people that work for us and get this stuff out. And then they get a bit of heat and then they flip. Like, have some spine, for God's sake. If you actually think this is good policy, then go ahead and do it, because people will respect you more for that than, because it sounds like they just want to be liked, not respected.
Well, yeah, look, I think that goes back to the psychology, which is having been defeated so much. It's exactly that. If they have that personality, in a sense, collectively, politically, which is, we just want to be liked. And the thing is, governments want to be, in politics, you should be feared or respected.
Yeah.
And don't go into politics if you want to be liked. There's other professions. Like it's one in which definition. We first start talking about your definition is through the fights you have. And so, for example, there was a decision made by George Osborne during the GFC that we'd have quantitative easing, like in other countries. But we gave our banks in the UK the most generous terms, and they've made billions of profits on it. So you could even now go, do you know what? You are the banks. You did well out of this. We're going to take some of that back. We'll have a banker's tax, and that tax we'll use to do this for people. And it's like, because there's not an ideological clarity, there's not then the courage. We should take money off banks because there's an economic reason and there's a fairness reason, or we should give it to people. And there's also an electoral reason, which is that banks don't have a single vote. And again, nobody is going to go out, they're not going to go defend their landlord. They're not going to go and go, don't touch my bank. I love my bank. My bank is really good. And it's like, it seems very odd to see a social democratic government choosing to protect people who are fair targets and not our people. And it's so all of this comes down, I think, to who are you running the economy for, on whose behalf, and then how are you going to fight? And I think there's a great story from the US for Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani's preparation to be mayor. He got Lina Khan, who'd been the chair of the Fair Trade Commission, the FTC, to come in and look at all the laws that he could use as mayor or could be used in New York to address the issue of affordability. And I think affordability is a great word rather than cost of living, because cost of living takes you to prices. Can a government reduce prices? Not very often. Is a pint of beer or a pint of milk going to be cheaper in Australia or in the UK at the time of the next general election? I doubt it. Are things going to be more affordable? They could be more affordable if I make the whole way in which you live fairer. I can cap your rent through rent control, or I can make sure you get a fair wage increase through sectoral bargaining. I can do all things as a government to affect your standards of living, to affect affordability. And what Mamdani did, Lina Khan came out with this, she found a law from the 30s which could be used in baseball grounds to cut the price of beer. And it's like, that is a great policy. He's got, in his campaign video, he had a policy proposal which would reduce the cost of chicken over rice, get it back to under $10. And that idea of using the power of government to address an issue of real concern, and you have it in a symbolic talking point. Now, if this was a Labour government that said, we'll cut the price of beer or we'll cut the price of takeaway food, people go, that's interesting. And then you don't need to explain why it's about using laws, competition market, the Competition Markets Authority or whatever. So I feel it's if you know your purpose, you then go, okay, what powers do we have to use? And if you know your purpose and your values, and you know your purpose and your values and who you want to win on behalf of, suddenly things become easier. That the fight is there. Fights define you. Fights shouldn't be avoided. I mean, they shouldn't be run towards either.
Is Sir Keir a strategy guy? And if he's not, and that's okay because he's he's the top of the ticket. Yeah. Are there people around him that can sit down and go, right, we need to get some clarity on who we are and how we're going to get there, and let's be less, to use your language, process focused and less tactics driven and more just broader. How do we get from A to B, and what does B look like?
So, the thing that I think is quite interesting is our caucus, our parliamentary Labour Party, went from around 200 to over 400. That's 200 new people, and they're actually pretty good. They're pretty good local representatives. They're full of ideas. I would say there are hardly any lottery winners in there. It's hardly any people who just put their name on the ballot and go, "Oh, I've won an unwinnable seat." Like big landslides bring in. But these are people with local issues, local commitment, and they've all got smart ideas. And they range from local ones where there's been MPs fighting, and this government has conceded to them, fighting to give a fair pension to former coal miners. So people are getting things like £5,000 back pay in a go because the Tories took a profit from the pension fund and put it in the Treasury, and Labour's going, no, that's the former miners' pensions. And that kind of thing is a modest victory, but for a working class family, a retired working class family, £5,000 is real money. And it's the combination of a local representation, us being the union party, and us being in power. But that ability to tap into the practical on the ground and the storytelling around it. And I think that's a frustration you find with there's plenty of good ideas, but there's a feeling, you look at the government, what are its most popular policies? Railway renationalisation, renters' rights, workers' rights, extending rights to workers, particularly in the gig economy, the informal economy. These are all really good, but it's a government, I think I said it last year, that feels embarrassed about those successes. And what the message that sends to the cabinet, to the junior ministers, and to the backbenchers is, don't have social democratic ideas. Don't try and promote them because we're embarrassed about them. So you don't want to stand out by saying, let's do this. You don't want to stand out by proposing that. And so there's a kind of a culture of dampening down ideas. And if you don't know what is right, you tend to just focus down on your constituency. So what's missing at the moment in the Labour Party is an honest discussion about how can we restore the 17% of votes we lost, let alone say what a disaster it was to win an election on only 34% of the vote. Because how we navigate the fragmented landscape of British politics. We've got 5 viable parties who are all in competition. So it means if you get 21% in a seat, because it's just first past the post, you can win a seat on 21%. So the instability in our politics is because of that fragmentation. How do you find a way to bring back voters, so Green voters or Lib Dem voters, to come to vote Labour? Do you need some form of electoral reform in the long run? Do you need 2PP, which I'd love in the UK? I'd love compulsory voting in 2PP, because you then create, you mobilise block politics. So we need to find a way to bring block politics. But I don't think any politics works if you don't have ideas. It's a battle of ideas. It's a victory of ideas. And Wes Streeting gave a speech this week at the Progress 30-year anniversary dinner. And I was really struck by the thing he said. He said, what the Labour government, it doesn't need cheerleaders, it needs thought leaders. And he was appealing for a battle of ideas. And I think that needs to be risen to by every member of the cabinet. It's not, there's a duty in the cabinet, I agree with you, that they should go, I've kicked the tires on this is a really good policy, let's keep fighting for it. There's also a duty to go, well, what if when we go out there, people react in this way? You should road test things. You should test the best arguments your opponents will have and work out if you can defeat them. Because in the end, I was talking to a colleague from Europe who said the biggest issue you have when you're in government is your ministers think being right is enough. And he said, you know what? it isn't a matter of being right or being wrong. It's a matter of winning the argument. And I think you need to go back to how do you win the argument? And I think having the best ideas is part of it, having the best comms is part of it. But it's never the comms that's the problem. It is always, have you got the best ideas? And are the best ideas aligned with the best values? Do they fit with your party? And I don't think in the end, we are the party that should be representing the bond markets. And yet it has been used as an argument to backbench MPs. You can't say that or think that because the bond markets don't like it. The bond markets should not be doing party discipline in a social democratic party.
And to the second point you just made there before, I mean, John Armitage, a guy we've had on the podcast on previous occasions, who's been a researcher for the Labor Party here in Australia, back home in Australia, often says that oppositions shouldn't behave like as if they're in government, and governments shouldn't behave. They should behave like they're in opposition. And the other thing I want to sort of pick up on what you just talked about there before is that. Yeah, they should road test those things, those cabinet ministers, but it's on them and it's on the broader caucus to have a connection with the constituencies that they seek to represent. And if there is a disconnect, then that leads to shit policy, basically. I think Marshall Gantz talked about it as leadership island when the leaders are no longer connected to the people they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I often say... the metaphor I use is that a party and a government need to provide many, many bridges for people to come across. We often say, we've got this one offer, if you like it or not. And I'm like, no, loads of many, many bridges. Whatever way you come to us, that's fine with me. And I do think there's a saying that we got from the Democrats, the Clinton Democrats, which was, governing isn't campaigning. It's got a different pace, but elements of it are really important. When you are campaigning, you want to win the news cycle. When you're in government, when you're governing, you want to win the electoral cycle. But it means there's a tension there. It's not one thing or the other. You do need to you have some of that opposition mentality when you're governing. The thing that I wonder about, back in the 1970s, there was a Tory politician, senior Tory politician, Lord Hailsham, who attacked the then Labour government and called it an elective dictatorship. And he said, this is the danger of socialism. And it was a ranty speech. But at the core of it, he had a real point, which is in the global north, the UK government is the least constrained democratically elected government, because when you win a majority in the House of Commons, the legislature has no power over you. The executive have complete control. The executive has set things up so that the Supreme Court can't overrule you. So their decisions can be set aside by Parliament. They've set it up so that the Human Rights Act can be set. You have control of every part of government. It's a unitary state. You can do what you want. And the thing that frustrates me is if ministers read Lord Hailsham's lecture, they'd go, we can do what we want. If we really set our mind to it, we can solve the housing issue. But they stop before that and they don't realize how powerful they are. And I don't think the country at large realizes this is the most empowered government. But I do think one of the things about the pandemic was a big lesson to all voters. When government wants to move fast, it can. And it does. And it finds money and it spends it effectively. There was furlough and most people were kept well during furlough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, COVID just proved that to all of us, didn't it?
And then they come out. Why did we come out of furlough? We came out of it being confined in our homes because the governments funded a vaccine, and governments fund health systems that rolled out a vaccine. Every single bit of that is about a government acting quickly, solve a problem. The only politician who I've seen globally capturing that energy is actually Donald Trump. First thing he did when he came into government was executive orders. Now, partly theatre, a lot of it unconstitutional and illegal, a lot of it going to fall apart when it finally gets ruled on by the Supreme Court. But the fundamental grammar of his politics was, you've got a president, you've got a problem, your president's going to act. And that sense of action, now, it's action with values. And what do Social Democrats do? Action with values, action that builds new institutions. But it's the feeling of, it's almost a willed powerlessness at the center. We can't do anything because we're the government. It's like some of the language you hear from ministers is like what you normally hear from a third or fourth term government, and people are going, well, the first line of any answer to anything is, you don't know how hard it is to be a government. And you know that if you ever have a politician that says you don't know how hard it is to be in government, the voters go, do you know what? I reckon I've got a solution for that one. I'll take the burden of government away from you.
Yeah.
And so so I think I think of it as purpose versus process. I think of it as strategy versus tactics. And I think that the most successful bits of the government have been when it's been true to social democratic values. When you say, stand back, capital's got more power than labor. It's taken more. The balance has shifted in the wrong direction. We should rebalance that. So therefore, it is right to tax businesses. It is right to say we want increase tax on workers. It is right to increase workers' rights. It is right to make the cost of employing somebody in the precarious economy, make it more expensive, make that a real job. And it's like, but if you want to articulate that modest social democratic ideology, people don't see what connects everything. And that is, I think that for me, the battle of ideas, the battle of ideology, the battle of 21st century, and it goes to a thing which I do think that the ALP sorted in the election platform, which was there's a need for a new grand bargain between state and people, the government and people, the government and business. We know these things will take some movement around. How do we get the right pension system for our elders? How do we get the right housing for the rising generation? How do we get a fair burden of debt for students? Well, the answer is we can only do it if we all work together, which again is collectivist ideology. And that's the frustration, which is that the right answer to where we are is full-throated social democracy, because Christian democracies collapsed all the way across Europe. Christian Democrats have just disappeared. They're still there in Germany, but the weakest ever. They've gone in France, they've gone in Italy. Conservative Party in the UK just yesterday lost one of their leadership contenders in the last leadership election. Robert Jenrick defected to Nigel Farage's reform. So you see a reshaping on the right in favour of the populist right. And come back to the strategic problem for Labour, because it's not social democratic enough, it's losing voters to the Greens. And what's the biggest challenge of the Greens? They're not social democrats. They actually, the core of their philosophy is a no-growth philosophy. A no-growth philosophy is bad, certainly for the UK, and I think definitely for Australia. If you don't grow, you can't redistribute. And if you don't redistribute, it means that people who are caught now in poverty or disadvantage have no chance of getting out. And that core, we're social democrats, we're for growth, we're for industrial growth, we're for the green transition to power industrial growth, we're for defence and defence strategy to power. We're for all these things, because with that growth, we can lift the people out of poverty and disadvantage. That should be a battle line for us with the Greens. But if you can't be proudly social democratic, what are you going to say? We're the best manager of the bond markets.
That's bleak, John.
Well, no, I do. Look, I think whole sight. If you don't diagnose the problem, you never solve it.
No, true. And I kind of want to switch now to the solutions component of it. It pains me to say that the natural solution that we always go to initially when any Labor Party is in this moment of crisis is leadership change.
Yeah.
And when I started reading that in the media, I don't know when these speculations first happened. Was it like early December this last year, or
around the Labour Party conference? There was a beginning. There was Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, should.
That's right.
He raised his head above the parapet, and he asked an honest and sensible question, which was, we've got the most unpopular prime minister in polling history. We've currently lost enough of our votes to be at 25%. Reform UK are larger than us, and quite a far right party in political formation. Do we think that keeping the same leader is going to make that number go up or go down? We've kept the same leader, and that number's gone down to 17%. The Andy Burnham question remains the same. Like, if we change the leader, would Labour's number go up or go down? And that is a good question in itself. It needs an answer. And if the centre have a policy, they should talk about it. If they have a way to get to 2028, 2029, the next general election, successfully, they should tell us, because then we can walk towards that. But I think the strategy is, let's get to the election, say, your choice is Starmer or Farage, who do you want? Now, at the moment, a forced choice, people say, well, I'd rather Keir Starmer was the Prime Minister than Nigel Farage.
But the polls aren't saying that, though, John.
They say with that one, the polls say Farage will have people will vote for reform. The polls also show preferred Prime Minister between the two in a forced choice. But that's not the choice. That's not the choice people get.
Correct.
That strategy is a leader's island strategy, which is I am on this island. It's not a build bridges. It doesn't say come to me for these reasons. It doesn't say the kind of Britain we want to build looks like this. It will be impossible to build that if Labour are not the government. And it is replacing the leader sometimes becomes essential, because you just have to say, how much further does the Labour vote have to go before people go, there's no recovery under this leader? And it doesn't mean that there will be successful recovery, but it means that the only chance of recovery. And I think that's why you have to think about the leadership change. You have to go, is it plausible that the person who's halved the vote from 34 to 17% can now get back another has a plan to get the same? Or is it possible you get to the moment, and we know it in all governments, when the public aren't listening, and in effect some of your policies, which are actually on paper really good and on paper supported by the electorate, don't get support because it's you that's saying them. And so, but for me, I'm trying to make it a theme through what we've been saying, you can't change the support for Labour by simply changing the leader. You have to change the ideas. You have to change the political economy. And that battle of ideas, I think that's what has to be settled in the next 6 months. I think it's really hard to imagine that Labour will do well in Scotland or Wales or London or local government in England, where big elections are coming, effectively the UK's midterms. I think it's hard to see that not being bad. The question is, how do you take a moment, you go, we've listened and we've learned, we lost our way, and you have to find, but you have to have a story, a value-driven story, where that this is how we lost our way and why we lost our way, and this is how we've refound our way, and this is where it will take not just us, but us in the country. And there's elements there's still elements of fight in the government, which are good fights to have. Keir Starmer kicked off the new year with an interview with the BBC, and he committed himself very powerfully to taking Britain closer and closer to the European Union single market. Now, that is economically a big deal, up to 4% of GDP. It's also politically a big deal because it's rerunning the Brexit argument, but it's by and large, about 2/3 of the country think Brexit's proved to be a failure. And the biggest proof point that Brexit's a failure, Nigel Farage and Reform never want to talk about Brexit. They never want to talk about Europe. And so I think Keir's political instinct in an area of foreign policy where he does really well, he's instinctively gone to that place and gone, no, if I talk about Europe, there will be no blowback, because none of my opponents want to make it an issue because they know it's a bad thing for them. And so fighting on Europe could be a place to get to. And I think...
To your point though, John, like when I started reading in the British media about leadership speculation, and you of all people know this because you've worked both in the Australian political context and the British political context. In fact, you worked in a government that was mired by constant leadership speculation and challenge in Australia. The minute that we start talking about that, you're not completely fucked, but you're pretty fucked. And I thought, one, it's remarkable that given the bloke was elected in May of 2024, and now we're not even halfway through the term, and we're talking about leadership instability. And the minute there's blood in the water, the sharks start circling, and Keir Starmer can get up and do an interview with the BBC and sound like he's got some focus finally. But I'm thinking it's too late, but I'm asking you because you've got a better judgment of this because you know the difference between an Australian leadership challenge and a British leadership challenge. I'm actually interested to get your thoughts on what the differences are and the nuances. But has he lost – what are your estimations? Has Starmer lost the support of the caucus, and is he basically dead in the water? It's a matter of when, not if.
It's definitely a matter of when, not if. I wrote a piece in the New Statesman last year saying that I believe the leadership election had kicked off. And that the moment that kicked it off was when staff in Number 10 briefed newspapers in an attack, a direct attack on Wes Streeting, who is the health secretary. He's a government loyalist, an ally of Keir, and the leading politician on the right of the party, great communicator, a really big believer in the Labour Party, passionate about the Labour Party and its future. And he was attacked by Number 10. And Number 10, the Prime Minister had an inquiry and found out that nobody in Number 10 was responsible for the briefing. And the journalists I know who were briefed say, well, there must have been a collective hallucination. So when you have an attack on your closest ally in the cabinet, it's like a drive-by, but they didn't kill him. When you do a drive-by, you actually shouldn't miss. When you come for the contender, you better not miss. And they've strengthened Keir. So they tried to strengthen Keir. What they did was strengthen Wes. And what happened, in effect, is they started leadership speculation. And once it starts, it can't be stopped unless you have a leadership change. So we come to where we are now. There's the New Statesman, which is if people want to follow, if people in Australia want to follow what's going on in UK politics, the New Statesman is now the essential read. The political editor, Alvire, she's brilliant. She breaks the stories. She understands the party. Her cover story this week is about the contours of the already ongoing leadership election. That genie can't go back into the bottle. The question is it done? Is it done well? And now, speed is often the best way to do these things. But I keep going back to, if you cannot sort out the purpose of this Labour government, then it doesn't matter who the face is at the top. If there's an argument that there's a new economic settlement, a new grand bargain, if there's an argument there's a different way of doing politics that doesn't alienate people, and you see in the government, Ed Miliband is a very popular prime minister. I'll say that again. Ed Miliband is a very popular cabinet member because he knows what he's doing. The green transition is really popular. And the green transition is popular because it's an industrial strategy. It's popular because people know the environment has to be dealt with. Even red wall voters, those leaning towards reform, understand that if we don't look after the planet, it might not be there for their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. It's a very powerful incentive for political change. And so you see elements of it. You've got a housing program that is trying to meet the needs. There's so many elements there of what is the right way to tackle the country's challenges. So you can pull them together, which is why I think you can make an argument Labour's lost its way, but it's got at its core a mandate in the election for its manifesto. But it's got to be a coherent set of ideas that goes, we lost our way when we decided that it was the bond markets who had a veto over the future of Britain, rather than when we said the people of Britain who've demanded change need to see this democratic, this social, and this economic change. And here's our program. Some comes quickly, some comes later. But we're never going to, we're never going to lose our way from this path. We'll be blown off course by events. Ukraine, this is still this big event in Europe. That makes us change our priorities and makes us change the speed at which. So it feels to me it's that rethinking of the total Labour story. That's the important thing. Why is it? This is going to take some time. I think nobody wants to take over the government in the run-up to the Welsh elections, where Reform are going to become one of the two biggest parties, and Labour, which has been the biggest party in Wales since 1910, are going to be fourth or fifth. But in the end, leadership is saying, this has to be done. This can't go on. How long can the patient be bleeding out on the table? And people go, well, should we really do something about the artery? Like, how many more points do we need to lose in the opinion polls?
Yeah. Look,
it's a terrible problem. So I think the danger is people don't just think it's fucked. They can't think of a way to unfuck it.
Mm. Do you know, like, I read that this morning in The Guardian and I rolled my eyes when they said nobody wants the job because the party's going to get belted in the May elections. And I was like,
I know.
What a luxury of the UK political cycle that you can afford to wait 4 months before you decide to neck your leader. Like, are you for real? You're not serious people. Like, there is so much at stake. But to all the point you've been saying, John, like, if you've got an idea and you've got an agenda and you think you know how to fix it and you're West Streeting, get in there, get in the game. Don't wait 4 months.
I always think it's like this. The road safety slogan is important. Speed kills.
Yeah,
like, speed kills a problem. But I know it's also. I mean, the irony will not be lost on your listeners, most of your listeners, that you can wait 4 months and you'll still have another 3 years of government.
Yeah. And you've just resourced Reform if they do as well as you said they would in Wales, and you've just probably resourced the SNP in Scotland if they have a resurgence in Scotland. Like,
and we've
elections matter.
You've resourced the Greens. The Greens will be so much stronger all across London. And one of the changing things in our electoral geography is after the SNP took their quite dominant position in Scotland, that was one of our heartlands. They became less safe, strong at the moment, but in terms of the MPs, when Reform, when the Tories took the Red Wall, now Reform threatening the Red Wall, that's another of our heartlands. And our heartlands in the UK are now the Northwest, so where Andy Burnham is a successful mayor, where Steve Rotherham is a successful mayor. So there's something, I think, about the politics of devolution that creates stronger. London, again, another strong Labour mayor, Sadiq Khan. London's a heartland and the southeast outside London, where families have moved out to get affordable housing. White collar workers being repelled by the policies of the Tory government under Johnson and Brexit and everything. There's a group of progressive voters in a new geography, but if you lose all, you're absolutely right. Elections matter. It really matters. Mamdani won that election. It really matters. If you lose, you lose. At the moment, Labour's lost members, but not activists, because it's still got councillors. When the councillors go, you lose some more. And there's a moment when a vicious circle turns into a death spiral. So I think this is very urgent, and I think it's having been through, working with Tony when eventually the successful leadership challenge came from Gordon, working with Julia when eventually the successful leadership challenge came from. Those leadership challenges are not a solution, but sometimes there comes a point when something has to be done, and it feels to me that's where the party is, and there's lots of displacement activity going on. At the end of last year, there was a lot of briefing from Number 10 that the real problem of the government was the building being a Georgian building. So it's never the shape of the building; it is the shape of your politics.
Yeah, and the people inside it.
Yeah.
we had some questions from our Patreon listeners the last time on the show, and I apologize to our Patreon listeners because I didn't actually see them. I was only learning how to use the Patreon page. I didn't realize I have to press refresh for the new questions to appear. So I've got a couple of questions from our listeners, John, and I just want to, with the time remaining, get you to just give some reflections. The first one is, it's from Paul, and it says, David Feeney has criticised UK Labor on the pod for falling into the woke mind virus, which is a term that David loves to use. Does John agree? And could UK Labor have handled some of these issues better?
So look, I love David, a long time friend and comrade. I don't believe there is a woke mind virus, because I don't believe that being in favor of equalities is a bad thing for a social democratic government. I do think that the woke mind virus and woke and the ideology of woke, or the label of woke, are used by conservative enemies, mainly in America, and then try to export it to try to stigmatize the cause of equality. And I do not think that we want to see a return, as they're seeing in the US, a return of homophobia, a return of misogyny, and a return to racism. So, the Trump government think it is woke to support women's suffrage. That is the logic of the attack on woke. So, are there issues which are difficult? Yes. The issue of trans rights has been divisive in UK politics. We have to ask ourselves, what's the core of that issue? Trans people are some of the most unhappy, discriminated against, and disadvantaged people in the country. Should any government of whatever sort have policies that make unhappy, miserable people more unhappy, miserable, and disadvantaged? I don't think so. And why is the battle and Labour's had been in this battle in the UK? Why is there such a row around woke issues, trans rights? It's because our opponents want to see us fighting each other. They want to see feminists fighting other people inside they want us fighting ourselves. And so, for me, is the Labour Party overcommitted to equalities? I'm not sure you can be if you're a Social Democrat and if you're Labour. Have some issues been handled badly? Well, yeah, I think sometimes people just need to go back to what's our principle. Our principle is of equal treatment, and our principle is of actually looking after disadvantaged people. Is our view, like Conservatives, that rights are limited and a currency that if you give some rights to some people, they take them from other people? I don't think that is the way to think about equality and think about rights. And I think the woke discourse has that element in it. I do have one element where I suspect David says when he used the word woke, and I agree with this. I do think there is something difficult about middle class, educated, university educated people trying to impose their standards of behavior on everybody in society. It's like, basically, I don't mind what your standards of behavior are on campus, and I don't mind how you treat your friends. I don't want you lecturing me on the ways I can be with other people in the world. And there's something about the policing behavior, which there is a line there, but we have to see the consequence of the attack on woke and the victory of the attack on woke in the American presidential elections is live on the streets of Minnesota at the moment. ICE are arresting people because they look Latino. So there's something. I suppose what I think is, it's best to open up all the elements of what we're talking about. And when we're talking about equality, I think we've got nothing to apologize about. When we're talking about the handling of some debates around some issues, I think we found it difficult to have those in the party, Labour Party, and in the government. And I think that's because they're difficult, and difficult issues should be difficult to deal with. But it's also because our opponents have searched and searched and searched for issues on which they can split us. And they found one in this, and they are, the Koch brothers are behind some of these debates. Now there's only one of them left. But the global conservative movement is always looking to find ways to divide us against ourselves. And they're proving successful in this upsurge in populism across Europe. So that's a lengthy answer, but I think it's because I'm disagreeing with David and he's not here. I want to kind of unpack some of these things. I'm not trying to dismiss what he says. I think I think one of the great things about David is he uses humor. And the one big thing about politics is humor is a great way of persuading people. Mm-hmm. And Trump uses humor, but cruel humor, to win people over. And we've got a bloodless Labour government that couldn't make anybody laugh about anything.
Very good. Thank you, Paul, for that question. Second question, this one's really kind of internally Labour Party, which I think you'll love. It's from Jerry. My question for John, the ALP structurally resembles UK Labour before New Labour. Trade unions in Australia still have high structural power and control 50% of the delegates on a national conference. Why was it important for UK Labour to largely disconnect itself from unions? And what's John's views on why the ALP didn't have to do it? Now, I don't know if that's completely true, John. I'm interested in getting your take on that, but that's from Jerry. Thanks, Jerry.
So, no, it's a great question. And I'm Labour. I will never leave the Labour Party. I will never not campaign for the Labour Party. There's only one thing which would ever make me leave the Labour Party, because some young people from the Tony Blair Institute saw me at a conference. I was speaking on 25 years on from the new Labour victory, 1997. They said, do you think Labour should break the links with the unions to modernise a bit, the final bit of modernisation? And I went, I would leave the UK Labour Party if it severed its links with the unions. We're a Labour Party. We're not a socialist party. We're not a social democratic party, though we have those values. We're not a progressive party. We're a Labour Party. And that marriage between the unions and the party is essential. And it is a marriage. It is a family. And it's like in any family, you can't live with them, can't live without them. Unions at times can drive you mad, but at base, they always keep you sane. They are a link, an anchor to reality. And in the end, union members need a Labour government. I mentioned earlier in the podcast. The NUM, we've got hardly any members now. They're all retired. The pits have been closed. A Labour government is the one that's sorting out their pension, their back pension, the unfairness in the system, and the way that the Tory government administered their pension, which was their money. And so I think there is a tension. It's a creative tension. And the British TUC Trades Union Congress came over. A couple of people came over, and they knew me from UK politics, and they've been meeting Australian politicians. They've been meeting Australian unions, and they sat down for a cup of tea with me in APH, and they said, John, the unions here love you. We used to hate you. What's the difference? And I said, the unions here, you can deal with them because in Australia, there's always a deal. Like, they'll make a demand, you go, that's too far, and they'll make a lesser demand, you go, okay, we can do a deal. And then they stay loyal to the leadership, they stay loyal to the party, they work, they don't, and it's that partnership of it. When it works well, it works well, it's creative. When it works badly, it's a creative tension. And you also have to get back from the tension to the creative. So I think one interesting thing, to get into a really nerdy thing, one thing that we did in reforms was introduce one member, one vote, so that people who paid the political levy had their voice expressed. Very low turnout. But as Labour Party membership has been falling in UK Labour, the importance of the affiliated members has risen. So it's likely that the next leader of the Labour Party, if there is an election, as we've talked about, I predict there will be one, that the critical and decisive votes will come from union members who are paying the affiliation.
That's interesting.
Move them from being people who paid a levy and then the money went to the leadership and it was given, and the power was really in the leader. This decisive role in picking the leader, we're going to find out that actually it's union members. They'll be the people, and that changed a bit of the way the battle has to be held, a bit of the way the communications have to go. So I think it has to modernize, because, and here's the thing, looking back on the New Labour thing, what I now say is New Labour was the right solution for the end of the 20th century. And it was right because it thought hard about ideas. There was a battle of ideas in the party in the years running up to government. And we are now in the second quarter of the 21st century. Not the first quarter, the second quarter of the 21st century. So if anybody thinks that an idea from 1994 is the right one for 30 years later, they're living in nostalgia. You have to live in the now. You have to meet the moment. And this is a big enough moment for all progressives. AI, climate crisis, geopolitics, just to start with. Then the rewriting of international security and defense by the US retreating to being a hemispheric power from being a hegemonic power. There's so many things moving. We need to be strong in our own countries so we can then be strong internationally together.
Wonderful. And what a great way to end. We do have a couple of other questions, and we're not going to get them to them today because they're actually quite meaty. One of them's on immigration, and if I ask John that, I reckon I'm going to get a good solid half hour out of him out of that one. But I'll hang on to those questions because I think we'll get John back again in May if he'll have us.
Yes. Talk about it.
Yeah. Well, in the lead up to the elections, the Assembly and the Scottish National Party and the local government elections, and then maybe we'll do a debrief after the results as well. So we'll get plenty of opportunity to have a chat to John in this first quarter.
The Welsh Parliament's now called the Senate. They renamed it from the Assembly.
Oh, did they?
So you've got a Welsh Senate. That's the Welsh word for Senate, and you've got the Scottish one. So it's a Senate, a Parliament, the London boroughs. Happy to come and talk about that. And as I always say, when I'm asked how I am feeling professionally, it's full employment for commentators.
Never a dull moment at all in British politics. And John, it's once again great to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show today. We wish you the best of success for 2026, and we'll talk to you in May. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.